Thank you very much, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much to the National Library of Israel for providing me with this opportunity to share my research of the past 2 years here in Berlin at the Freie University. A research that took me from Israel, where I did several years of postdoctoral research on Kabbalah. My field is Kabbalah, the theosophical, theoretical aspects of Kabbalah, and particularly also cultural history, the history of printing of Kabbalistic texts. And I would like to mention that and do a little bit of self-advertisement that only recently in November, my book from my doctoral dissertation was published, Kabbalah in Print, the study and popularization of Jewish mysticism in early modernity. And if anybody is interested in the topic, I invite you to read the book in the coming weeks, or over Pesach even is a good time. But coming back to Berlin and my current research, it took me from theoretical Kabbalah and the investigation of the printing of Kabbalistic books to a very different field, which is practical Kabbalah and magical recipe books. We are working as a team here in Berlin, and we're investigating the cultural, the religious significance of these amulets, charms, and magical practices that are collected in close to 100 manuscripts and their relevance to Jewish life in East Central Europe, as well as there's a very interesting connection to Hasidism. So with this introduction, I would like to invite you to join me today for an excursion into women, medicine, and magic in early modern East Central Europe. And I would also like to add that there's a special welcome to female members of the audience, because today is, of course, International Women's Day. And what better topic to speak about than women, medicine, and magic in early modern East Central Europe. First, I would like to begin on a personal note. Not long after the COVID-19 became a part of our daily lives, my 49-year-old cousin was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He struggled and hoped valiantly for months until the doctors concluded that operation was no longer on the table and he had only weeks left to live. The inferno he went through in the last weeks of his life was heartbreaking, not only because of his steep physical deterioration and decline, but also because not a day went by that he did not utter, "I want to live. If only I could live another month." And then toward the end of his life, "If only I could live another day." His life was exemplary, as was his death, the way he tried to spare and lessen the blow for his parents and family. I would like to dedicate today's talk to his memory. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life, while at the same time, I would also like to remember the many who have passed this past year before their time in the pandemic and left behind them a dark hole in the hearts of their loved ones. Illness and the desperate longing for wellness and healing define the prevalent orientation of magical recipe books we will survey today. These books were written in a thriving manuscript culture of practical Kabbalah that existed alongside printed works in Ashkenazi communities of East Central Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. These manuscripts belong to the literary genre of recipe books that played an important role in recording, accumulating, and subsequently transmitting knowledge about the natural and the supernatural worlds. As recipe compilations, these manuals, as we shall soon see, include lists of ingredients that are accompanied by detailed instructions directed at a practical goal, which in this case aimed to improve a person's material and spiritual well-being. The writers of these amulets, charms, adjurations, incantations, kameot, skulot, hashbaot in Hebrew, were called Baalei Shem, or masters of the name, who employed experiential type of knowledge in combination with traditions of angelic and divine names that expose a kind of holistic look based on the careful alignment and calibration of three interrelated spheres of human experience. One, the religious, derived from prayer, proper conduct, and sometimes sacred books like the Bible and Psalms. Two, artisanal knowledge of the natural world, the unique qualities of herbs, plants, and animal substances. And three, the mastery of supernatural forces and processes by wielding power over demons, forces of impurity, and astrological influences. The acquisition of this unique type of expertise, enumerated in these magical recipe books, bequeathed upon its master extraordinary power and charisma. So who were these Baalei Shem? They were masters of the name. Gersh Sholem defines a Baal Shem as, quote, a man who knows the secret of the name, the Shem HaMeforash, the ineffable name of God, and other holy names, and knows how to carry out magical operations by using these divine and angelic names, end of quote. Charisma and charismatic leadership are key to understanding the Baalei Shem. Max Weber, the famous sociologist's definition of charismatic leadership, captures very well some of the defining characteristics of a model of mystical leadership we encounter widely in the history of Jewish mysticism, from the depiction of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the narrative portions of the Zohar to hagiographic accounts of the great Safavian mystic Rabbi Isaac Luria, to the putative founder of Hasidism, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem, or the Besht, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, the Besht. And Weber says the following: a certain quality of an individual personality defines charisma, by virtue of which he's set apart from ordinary men and treated as endowed with supernatural, superhuman, or at least specifically exceptional powers or qualities. These are such as are not accessible to ordinary person, but are regarded as of divine origin or as exemplary, and on the basis of them, the individual concerned is treated as a leader. Weber's model of charismatic authority, therefore, underlines three important elements. The first connects charisma with its etymological root, signifying bestowal, a gift which can only partially be acquired by human intellect, and it's mostly bestowed by some kind of divine gift. As such, charismatic authority constitutes a highly unstable and volatile type of authority that remains ultimately dependent on sustenance from its divine source. The second aspect highlights that once acquired, such knowledge bestows exceptional powers on its wielder. And the third point draws attention to the relational aspect of the charismatic leader to a group of followers, disciples, and the community to which and in which he ministers. Aptly describing the tzaddik, the righteous one of the generation, as Yesod Olam, as the foundation of the world, the scholar Arthur Green made his living as an itinerant healer in the regions of Bohemia, Romania, Bukovina, Latvia, and several of the Eastern European locales. This work of 389 folio pages represents, so it's a very large, complex manuscript, represents a long and elaborate manuscript that was found by Professor Petrovsky-Stern at the Vernetsky Library in Kiev in 1993. The work's most pervasive characteristic, which also distinguishes it from a number of other magical manuscripts, is the ubiquitous use of the first person, through which we gain a much better understanding and perspective of Hillel Baal Shem, including his daily concerns, the textual sources that were available to him, challenges he faced, and his overall attitude toward health, illness, other medical professionals, and in general, the vicissitudes of his life as an itinerant miracle worker. And he very generously includes remarks to this extent throughout the manuscript. He begins the book by an allusion to the classic Kabbalistic esoteric text in Judaism, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, an enigmatic treatise written in the centuries following the destruction of the Second Temple, that delineates God's creation of the world through 32 wondrous paths of wisdom, Netivot Chochmah. And here you have, and Hillel says, and here you have 32 principles or rules that correspond to 32 paths of wisdom, front and back. And as they function according to God's will in relation to the upper beings, similarly, they can be applied with God's help to the lower beings. Likewise, as there are 10 Sephirot of holiness, there are 10 Sephirot or divine potencies of impurity. There are holy names and unholy names, holy angels and earthly ones. Hillel here positions his book, Sefer HaCheshek, aligning it with the authority of Sefer Yetzirah and establishing the parallelism between the macrocosm and the microcosm in the universe, which forms the basis of magical operations. He further delineates a dualistic attitude borrowed from earlier Kabbalistic traditions that maintain a separate sphere of influence attributed to the other side, the demonic sphere, called in Aramaic the Sitra Achra, inhabited by 10 Sephirot of impurity and served by demonic and impure beings. In another longer passage, as well as in select places throughout the manuscript, Hillel reveals how he came to acquire the knowledge and expertise that he obtained, providing us with a unique window into transmission networks active in early modern East Central Europe for the acquisition of practical Kabbalah. And he says the following: I, Hillel, lowly and scorned, turned away little by little from the preoccupation with this world. I searched and investigated thoroughly all of the methods until, with God's help, I found healing for several medical conditions, as well as many magical charms, segulot, that Ashmedai, the king, the demonic king, revealed to King Solomon of blessed memory. And I toiled with God's help in various communities and in diverse areas as people saw and can solemnly testify concerning what they saw clearly with their eyes and heard with their ears. They will testify with God as their witness that it is all reliable and true. Therefore, be exceedingly diligent that this holy book gets into the possession only of one who is truly pure, one who acts and conducts himself in an appropriate, kosher, pleasing manner, one who investigates rigorously how to bring himself close to the performance of a particular operation and to be scrupulous in writing its consonants, its letters, and its vowels, as I thoroughly explained. Hillel describes in this passage a gradual ascetic turn that brought him into the study of practical Kabbalah and turned him away from worldly matters, establishing himself as an authoritative practitioner in possession of the secrets to manipulate and control the natural and supernatural elements of existence. He also hints at rigorous requirements from the learner, encompassing righteous, ethical, and halakhic conduct, humility, and the application of meticulous care in the performance of magical operations. We gain a better perspective of Hillel's education in the magical arts from other passages in the manuscript, where he highlights his long tenure and apprenticeship with the learned Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch, who was the head of the rabbinic court in Mezrich and died in 1724. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch was also the son-in-law of Rabbi Mordecai, the head of the rabbinic court in Brisk, Lithuania. He affectionately recalls his apprenticeship under Tzvi Hirsch, which comprised oral explication of secrets concerning divine names, alongside copying from Kabbalistic texts and manuscripts. He also studied with medical doctors. He repeatedly credits the doctor Abraham Isaac Fortis, who descended from an Italian and Polish family of doctors and rabbis, and who most likely completed his medical training at the University of Mantua in Italy. The tangled relationship between scientific, medical, and the mystical magical spheres that characterize the early modern period is illustrated by the fact that Fortis, the doctor, was also an adept in Kabbalistic ideas, texts, and rituals, having spent some time learning Kabbalah under the famous Moshe Zacuto in Italy. That Fortis's medical knowledge had a strong impact on Hillel's expertise as a healer is attested to by a number of remedies that call for medical knowledge. A salient example is using a patient's pulse as a diagnostic technique for various ailments, to which Hillel dedicates a separate section called Bedikat Hadafakim, setting Sefer HaCheshek in this aspect apart from other manuals of Jewish magic. It is important to emphasize, however, that the office of Baalei Shem, as a special category of healers, was not limited to early modern East Central Europe. We have evidence for the use of magical formulas, recipes, and rituals for therapeutic goals and purposes in Jewish communities throughout Europe, underlining their centrality in the lives of Jews as far back as the Middle Ages. An interesting evidence to bear this out comes from the marginal notations of a large medieval rabbinic compilation, the manuscript Parma Bibliotheca Palatina 2342, which was written in the 13th century and discussed by Professor Ephraim Shoham Steiner. He points out that marginal glosses in this manuscript reveal an array of charms, recipes, and adjurations that address minor to acute illnesses, from treating a barren woman, earaches, to securing good luck and warding off the evil eye. Other notes in this manuscript provide instruction for the use of biblical psalms. For example, the gloss on Psalm 51, written in the marginal notes around the classic rabbinical text, prescribes the following, very surprisingly. For a headache, one should recite this psalm 3 times a day and say, "May it be your will, O living and eternal God, to deliver me," and you have to fill in the patient's name, "from an earache or pain. Amen, amen, salah." Appearing alongside the classical rabbinic text, these magical recipes highlight the harmonious coexistence between distinct varieties of Jewish knowledge and provide a unique window on the daily concerns of Ashkenazi Jews. And again, remember, this is already in the Middle Ages. A ubiquitous concern in these manuscripts of practical Kabbalah that I have studied is the management of the female body. More specifically, women's reproductive cycle, fertility, and gynecological concerns. These manuscripts, dispersed mainly in various European, North American, and Israeli libraries and private collections, constitute a largely understudied corpus that can provide hitherto unexplored insights into daily life and quotidian concerns of Jews in early modern East Central Europe. These include women's bodies, male and female fertility, the family, food waste, alongside recipes for performing exorcism, releasing prisoners from jail, and even becoming invisible, sometimes a very handy tool to have. At the intersection between medicine, magic, and artisanal practices, these manuscripts of magical recipes, beside providing important insights into daily life, also reveal a glimpse into dominant attitudes toward the natural world, the adaptation of received Kabbalistic knowledge, and the construction of power that enabled these magicians, or Balei Shem, to be acknowledged as effective healers. My current research applies the concept of lived religion to the epistemological category of Jewish magic and practical Kabbalah. As noted by the sociologist Meredith McGuire, magic problematizes traditional religious tenets, and this is true also in Judaism, and provides a unique prism for exploring the construction of a more hybrid religious space where normative and institutionally sanctioned textual sources and beliefs appear alongside sometimes antinomian practices that are frequently embedded within a more radically constructed mythical framework. McGuire highlights an important misconception toward everyday expressions of religious attitudes expressed in magical rites and rituals that seek to demarcate institutional religion from its popular expressions in society. Instead of following such dichotomous categories, which sanctions the official, but marginalizes, or often, as we have seen in the history of religion, excommunicates or persecutes the irrational, McGuire advocates for an idea of lived religion. Accordingly, she argues that the way ordinary people live and practice religion can differ vastly from how institutions prescribe religion through texts, beliefs, and ritual praxis. She emphasizes the value that can be gained for considering religion as it is practiced by religious persons in daily life, and the embodied, often routinized practices that link the material aspects of people's lives with the spiritual. Other sociologists, such as Mary Douglas and the literary critic Judith Butler, argue that the body is not a historically universal construct, but a socially structured entity bearing the marks of societal hierarchy and power relations. Bruce Lincoln further asserts that the various modes of discourse mediated through rituals, myth, and gender, myth, and gender as a taxonomy facilitate the creation of social constructs to reinforce boundaries and prevalent hierarchies. Magical techniques described in these Jewish recipe books that aimed to affect healing in women expose the prevalence of an underlying male attitude that sees the feminine as constituted by equally potent binary powers. A Kabbalistically nuanced conceptualization sees the feminine as constituted by binary forces. The first, a dark and malevolent female energy, is represented by the mythical figure of Lilith that needs to be chained and restrained with the help of magical spells and procedures. The other, and they juxtapose Lilith to this other, is the divine feminine, the Shekhinah, and her earthly embodiment, the Jewish woman, whose activities of regeneration and nourishment demand not merely religious and ritual adherence to Jewish law, but also recourse to metaphysical techniques and magical formulae that are potent enough to empower it. Thus, my work argues and demonstrates that magic constituted a powerful mechanism in the hands of the Baal Shem that enabled the male Kabbalist and Baal Shem to control and balance the female energies of the universe. Let us now look at some of the magical recipes from various manuscripts that I investigated. In the following example, we encounter biblical characters, male and female, in the amulet, presenting two parallel lists that bring to mind, in a way, the list that Rabbi Hillel Baal Shem provided at the beginning of his book, Sefer HaCheshek, if you recall, 10 heavenly emanations that parallel 10 impure emanations, and the angels below negatively mirroring those on high. And here too, we will have not angels and Sephirot, but we will have various characters from the Bible. But again, we have a list, a dichotomous list, a binary list, those under the rubric of holiness and the sacred, and those under the rubric of demonic and negative, with a negative connotation. So let us look at the amulet. For one who has difficulty in childbirth, write on ritually kosher deerskin that is lined and contains diacritical marks, tagin. Adam and Eve, but not Lilith. Abraham and Sarah, but not the sons of Keturah. Isaac and Rebekah, but not Esau and Eliphaz. Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, and the tribes of God, Shifteah. Samuel and his mother Hannah. May it be your will, our God, and God of our forefathers, that for the sake of the merit of these righteous men and women, that you have mercy on this woman who gives birth. You should place the parchment under the woman's left breast in the name of, and then the scribe provides 3 divine names. Beginning with the dawn of human history, righteous ancestors, both male and female, are invoked in this amulet to watch over and protect the birthing woman. The progenitor of humankind, Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Leah, Rachel, and the tribes, and finally the prophet Samuel and his mother Hannah. The list of those who do not get an invitation to the birthing bed includes only one female entity, Lilith, in the company of 2 male figures, Esau and Eliphaz. The placing of this amulet under the left breast of the woman, presumably under the heart, and not, interestingly, under the womb or the thigh. The thigh often comes up in various amulets, serves, I posit, to exorcise negative demonic influences from the heart of the birthing woman, the center of physical, emotional, and psychological. Alongside medical advice, protective magical formulas were in great demand in the area of pregnancy and childbirth in these manuscripts. Entering a space of liminality, the female body was poised to be transformed into a battlefield between the positive, life-sustaining, and the corrosive and morbid forces of the universe. Spells, amulets, and charms helped to tip the balance and restrict the effects of demons and their macabre activities that brought death, illness, and despair. Recipes recommended throughout these recipe books for the health and care of the female body, issues of fertility, the various stages of pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum care, evince also the use of animal and plant substances alongside biblical verses and holy names in protecting the life of a woman giving birth and her newborn child. Lilith, as we saw in this particular amulet, and she comes up regularly in magical recipes, is a recurring figure in the amulets, which are directed to weaken her powers. In the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith is identified as Adam's first wife, who, like him, was created out of dust, and therefore refused to lie with him as she felt equal to him in stature. She said, "Why should I lie beneath you when I'm your equal, since both of us were created from dust?" In the Zohar's mythical narrative, the important medieval mystical book, the Zohar, Lilith is portrayed as a female figure, created on the fourth day of creation, at the same time when the lights came into existence. The narrative of Lilith is bound up with refusal, power, independence, but ultimately marginal existence. She is rendered powerless, says the alphabet of Ben Sira, by three angels often depicted on amulets, who are called Sanoi, Sansanoi, and Samagalaf. Lilith swore to them, says this Midrashic composition, by the name of the living and eternal God, "Whenever I see you, or your names, or your forms on an amulet, I will have no power over that infant." She also agreed to have 100 of her children die every day. Accordingly, every day 100 demons perish, and for the same reason, rewrite the angels' names on the amulets of young children. When Lilith sees their names, she remembers her oath, and the child recovers. Magical customs concerning amulets against Lilith have been around since the Middle Ages and even before. A 16th century work, Sefer HaTishbi, in Sefer HaTishbi, Rabbi Eliyahu Bocher writes the following: "It is written concerning Lilith that during those 130 years that Adam was separated from Eve, demons came and were aroused by him, engendering demons, evil spirits, and mazikin." In another place I found written concerning 4 women who are the mothers of demons: Lilith, Naamah, Ugeret, and Mahalat. And in the book Ben Sira, in his response to the 6th question that Nebuchadnezzar posed to him, namely, why do boys who are 8 days old die? He stated, "Because of Lilith, who murders them." Ben Sira then discusses the topic extensively, but I have abridged his words here because I do not believe in this, he says. Nevertheless, we follow the custom, even though he doesn't believe in it, we follow the custom in our Ashkenazi communities to draw a circle with a piece of coal on the surrounding walls of the room where the pregnant woman lies, and write on every wall, Adam, Hava, excluding Lilith. So we see the transmission of this kind of tradition between this text as well as this amulet that I just showed you. At the entrance to the room, we write the names of 3 angels to whom Lilith herself was handed over when they wanted to sink her in the sea. All this is described at length in the book Ben Sira, and anyone who believes in it can look it up, he says. We're now going to move away from Lilith, but to another very interesting topic, and that is the use of magic squares in amulets in connection with female issues. Magic squares had been ubiquitous in the Middle East and India for over a millennium, and were gradually brought to Europe through commercial trade between Jewish communities in Spain, southern Italy, and other parts of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. The most elementary magic square of Islamic origin was made up of 3 compartments and letters. The next ones were squares of 4, while Hindu representatives tended to have 5 cells. In addition, there were squares of 7, 8, and 9 compartments. The squares of 7 tended to be explained in relation to planetary influences of the 7 planets. The 16th century Christian mystic Cornelius Agrippa von Nettesheim dedicated an entire treatise in his book De Occulta Philosophia to the issue of magic squares and their association with the planets. It is reasonable to posit that Agrippa learned about these squares during his travels in Italy between 1511 and 1518, when he undoubtedly came into contact with Kabbalistic circles and individuals. Be that as it may, magic squares communicated and represented complex religious symbols and meaning in a number of cultures. We will now look at a magic square of 3 compartments. This is for a woman who has difficulty with childbirth. Take a new clay shard and split it into 2, then write on each piece the following arrangement and show it to the woman, says the recipe. Notice that around the magic squares, and each magic square is framed by biblical verses. On the right, from Psalm 107, those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, shackled in affliction and iron. And the left one is Isaiah 42:7, opening eyes, deprived of light, rescuing prisoners from confinement, from the deepest dungeon, those who sit in darkness. The squares, as we can see, are divided into compartments containing Hebrew letters that also, in the Jewish tradition, represent numerical values. The inclusion of this magical square in an early modern recipe book demonstrates the permeable cultural and temporal boundaries in the transmission of magical traditions. As Carmen Caballero Navas has shown, this amulet is already attested to and was used in a very important medieval medical text, which was written in the 13th century, most likely, devoted to women's health and well-being, titled The Book of Women's Love. In this text, the amulet is attributed to Nachmanides, the Ramban, the sign of Kabbalah in Girona, in Catalonia, which was actually a natural association based on Kabbalistic speculation of the power of Hebrew letters as comprising both linguistic and mathematical attributes. Furthermore, the responsa of Nachmanides' disciple, Rabbi Solomon ibn Adret, reveals Nachmanides' familiarity with astrological talismans, which he deployed for therapeutic purposes and ends. In another responsum of Rabbi Ibn Adret, he reveals that in fact Nachmanides treated women for medical issues concerning fertility. Attributing the magical square to one of the most revered medieval rabbinic authorities and an expert in speculative Kabbalah, served to garner prestige and authority, not just to magical practice, but also to practical Kabbalah within the field of Jewish esotericism. The medieval origin of this amulet also in the medieval original of this amulet, it actually specifies, unlike in the one that we're looking at on the screen, that it must be placed under the foot of the woman. So here we see how a particular tradition changes and takes on new characteristics as it goes from a medieval Jewish text to an early modern recipe book of Jewish magic. Let me point out another very interesting characteristic of this amulet, and that is that the woman had to retain a visual imprint of the amulet and see the image of the magical square. Therefore, the visual component and the kind of internalization of the amulet through the eyes were crucial for its efficacy. The psalmic verses and the passage from Isaiah surrounding the squares serve to reinforce the message of release from a place of darkness to light, as if saying that the sojourn of the child inside the womb of the mother is like a prisoner in a dungeon. It is only temporary, from which she or he needs to emerge without delay into light and life. Across the manuscripts that I have examined, we see the proliferation of alternative magical practices to treat the same medical condition. For example, to ease the emergence, in this case, of the fetus from the womb, using similar but not identical elements. And this attests to the diffusion and local adaptation of magical formulae that contributed to creating a market of competing cures, each vying for maximum efficacy in the medical marketplace. We will now look at another magical square, and this one has 5 compartments. It is from the 17th or early 18th century, and the scribe is actually indicated in the manuscript as Yehoshua ben Yehiel Mikol. And this says the following: write an amulet with this figure on one side, and on the other side inscribe Psalm 67 in the form of the menorah, and at the moment that the woman or the woman sits on the mashber, on the birthing stool, place it upon her head and she will deliver. It is true and tested. One of the interesting repeated formulas that come up in magical recipes is that it's true and tested, and you don't see it with every single recipe. So it attests to the fact that usually the Baal Shem who used it had actually tried it, and he can attest to its efficacy. But it's something that comes up in connection with most recipes or many recipes in these manuscripts. It is also interesting to note in this particular one that it is a tradition in Judaism to indicate and to inscribe Psalm 67 in the form of the menorah, and sometimes even as you're saying the psalm, you're supposed to visualize it as a menorah. Now we're going to move to another set of recipes, and this one is there's one here against miscarriage. The first one says, for a woman, she would not miscarry the child or the fruit of her womb. Write these names on a ritually pure parchment and hang it on her waist and remove it once she delivers. In several of the recipes that I read concerning such a practice, they admonish the Baal Shem admonish whoever carries out this practice to immediately remove such an amulet from the woman, because they are so powerful that it can bring out the entire womb or inside of the woman. So you have to really, just like with any recipe, if you go into the kitchen and they tell you to bake a cake, if you don't follow the recipe correctly, you can come out with a burnt cake or something that no one can eat in the family. It's very, very similar. Many things are pinned on small details, and the Baal Shem admonish those who carry out these practices to always be very careful and always follow instructions whenever you cook or you carry out magical operations. Always follow instructions. toward the bottom of the page, we have a very interesting segula, a charm, which is ascribed to Huldah the prophetess. So, who comes up in the Book of Kings and in Chronicles. It's very interesting that a charm segula that is meant to help and heal a woman in distress comes down and is attributed to a biblical female figure. And I have seen Huldah in several of the manuscripts that I dealt with. Okay, we're coming back to Sefer HaCheshek, to Hillel Baal Shem, in a very interesting recipe. And this one deals with difficulty in childbirth on the one hand, or a very enigmatic expression called beinemen, which in Yiddish means exchange or snatching, and it refers to the exchange of the either unborn or recently born child. So let me talk about this a little bit. Here, let's read this together. A woman should stand in front of the hazel tree in a way that she should face directly the tree after its flowers had already bloomed. She should then make a hole with a new awl that a blacksmith made for this purpose only, so exclusively for this purpose. She should then take her finger and her toenails, as well as some hair from the four corners of her head, together with a string, which she's supposed to use for measuring from the top of her head to her big toe. Then she should collect the nails with hair in a white piece of paper and tie it with the string used above and place it with some part of the tree or bark of the tree or the hazelnut in the hollow of the tree. And she should take care to, she should take her hand and strike the hollow, saying, just as the tree, hair, nails of one's hand and feet cannot come out of the tree, so an evil, infirmity, calamity, or injury is forbidden to ever enter and come close. This recipe is good for a difficult pregnancy, epilepsy, and fever. One is allowed to say it in the holy tongue, the vernacular, or Greek. In this particular recipe, it's very interesting that we see the meeting between Jewish traditions on the one hand that come into contact with popular or folk traditions that are adapted from the surrounding culture. In Slavic lore, it is not uncommon to this idea that children are snatched from their mother, and in their place, a rag doll or a doll stuffed with hay is left. And this particular recipe is there to ward off such an exchange. Or there's also a sense that because he, particularly at the beginning of this recipe, refers to the fact that this is for either a newborn, so after the woman delivers, or in the 7th month of pregnancy or before. So there's a sense that perhaps Lilith or other demonic powers can exchange the child already within the womb. And Slavic lore has ascribed physical deformity and physical issues to the play of demons and to a kind of change that happened to the fetus in the womb of the mother. So this is the kind of cultural context that brings about and informs this particular recipe. One second. And now we're going to move to a kind of medical type of recipe. Let me just check. Okay, no, this was the one that I wanted to come to. So this particular recipe is uses biblical passages to control bodily fluids. And it says, to reduce the blood of Nida, say 3 times the verse from Psalm 51. Indeed, you desire truth about which is hidden. Teach me wisdom of secret things. The context, if we look at the context of the song, it begins with the following words. For the conductor, Lamnatseach, a song by David, when Nathan the prophet came to him to reproach him, when he, that is David, came to Bathsheba. The rest of the song is divided into 3 parts. The first enumerates David's sin with Bathsheba. The second beseeches God to forgive his grievous transgression and allow him to live and not perish. And third, in exchange for his life, David pledges to God, I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. In other words, David will become the paragon of future sinners, paving the way to tshuva, to repentance, and return to God. Presumably, the efficacy of the recitation of the psalmic verse to shorten the flow of menstrual blood derived from the parallel between the transgressive behavior of David and the abnormality of the blood flow, which also could potentially lead to the loss of life as the woman is prevented from conjugal relations with her husband, the possibility of conception, and the engendering of a new life. In this case, the ritual recitation of a psalmic verse 3 times serves as an antidote against demonic forces of illness and death. Now we come to the next recipe, which illustrates very nicely the intersection between medicine and magic, and it says the following. I think the top part is cut off. In the writings of Rabbi Yoel, Zichrono Livracha, may his name be a blessing, it is written that a pregnant woman who eats karkum, or saffron, turmeric, that this is a great reason that she would give birth to a fetus covered with boils and inflammation. And there's reference to this in Talmud, Bechorot. And therefore, she should never eat karkum during her pregnancy at all. And then he brings the doctors. So the Baal Shem brings the doctor's advice to bear upon this matter. The doctors say that blood should not be drawn at all during her pregnancy because the blood is necessary to nurture and strengthen the fetus. These are the herbs. So there are herbs that strengthen pregnancy, and there are herbs in this particular case that hinder it and that should not be used. Finally, we come to a very interesting area, and that is magic and halakha. In several recipes, and this is throughout all the magical textual texts and manuscripts that I have surveyed, you come across ingredients that are supposed to be used in these recipes that are not kosher. In fact, in one of the magical recipe books, there's an entire tractate devoted to the droppings and the feces of various animals. So this is a recurrent topic in these manuscripts. Kashrut, the laws governing the consumption of food, becomes a contested religious category in these magical manuals, as various non-kosher animals such as bats, rabbits, frogs, that are deemed unequivocally impure by Jewish law, become essential ingredients in certain recipes. This antinomian tendency, unique to magical recipe books, invites further and more systematic treatment and could be attributed to porous cost control boundaries and folkways as remedies got borrowed and adapted from diverse cultural religious contexts. In this particular example that I brought, take the droppings of ground mice mixed with water or alcohol. Another charm for a woman whose child died inside her, give her milk of a female dog to drink and mix it with honey. Perhaps in the question and answer period, I could come to some of the solutions to what I came across Baalei Shem or the scribes, writers of these manuscripts offered for the halachic conundrum. In closing, the thriving manuscript culture of handwritten recipe books of practical Kabbalah that existed alongside printed works of Jewish mysticism provide an important missing link for contextualizing the life and activities of Baalei Shem, their charismatic leadership, and the unique ways in which received Kabbalistic ideas were refashioned into new spiritual and religious ideals. At the intersection between medicine, magic, and folk practices, these magical recipes provide important insights into attitudes toward the natural world, the adaptation of received Kabbalistic traditions, and the construction of power that enabled these magicians or Baalei Shem to be acknowledged as effective healers. Indeed, Hasidism as a movement cannot be properly appreciated without exposing the complex world of early modern East European magical manuals that offer a glimpse into the rich and multifaceted tapestry of Jewish and non-Jewish society in which the Baal Shem Tov and other Hasidic teachers emerged. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gondos. There are many questions. I apologize in advance to those I will skip over. Sorry. Silver asked if, did female members of the community practice these magic rituals?
So the manuscripts that I have surveyed are all written by men. However, there are, for example, in Hillel Baal Shem's manuscript in Sefer HaCheshek, there are some, not many, but some references to female practitioners of magic that may have been in competition with the male Baalei Shem, or they were wise women who knew how to help at the birthing bed, and they had access to certain formulas that were handed down to them through other wise women. So there are some references, but Hillel's manuscript and work is the only one where I found such references. Now, I know that Jordan Katz, she's a scholar who works on midwives in Germany in the early modern period. And one of the things that I would like to have a discussion with her about is whether she came across in the communal records, she looks at communal records of midwives, whether she came across the use of any magic. But often what happens is that there were these specialists out there, but unfortunately their knowledge, because it was not inscribed knowledge, it wasn't written down in books, they didn't write books, and therefore they didn't leave behind text. One of the difficulties with this type of lore, with this type of knowledge, is that it is passed down often orally, and we're very, very lucky to have the manuscript from, for example, Hillel Baal Shem, who inserts so many autobiographical elements into his manuscript that actually provides us a window to other practitioners some of the challenges that he faced, some of the issues from his life, some autobiographical information about from where and to where he traveled, the dangers he faced, the books he consulted. But I have also consulted a dozen other manuscripts that only have recipes, do this, do that, and absolutely zero autobiographical element or even more about the context. So you're trying to piece together, and you have to piece together a world from the recipes themselves, which is really difficult. Perhaps looking into communal records, whatever communal records are left, as well as Shalot to Chuvot, these would be areas where perhaps one could encounter women and women using magical practices.
Thank you very much. Lisa asked, is there a similar discussion of positive and negative masculine energies?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Lisa. If you look at the one of the examples that I brought, yes, there's definitely the biblical matriarchs and patriarchs, if you recall, where we had Adam, Eve, Abraham, Jacob on the one side, and Samuel and Hannah and the tribes, and on the other side we had Lilith, but we also had those more demonic negative elements of Esau and Eliphaz. So it's interesting that yes, definitely Esau is an element, is a figure who in Kabbalistic text is often identified as negative, identified also with Christianity, who inflicts torment on Jewish communities and on Jews. So he's a paradigmatic figure who comes up as very negative. Thank you, Lisa, for that question.
Thank you very much. Well, Barbara commented that she didn't know if you, Dr. Gondos, explained clearly that this text was never been analyzed in this century, if at all, by anyone other than you. So I want to ask, why is that? Okay, so
Hillel Baal Shem's manuscript, as I mentioned, was found by Professor Petrovsky-Stern, who is a professor at Northeastern University, and he was a librarian at the time in Kiev, and he's the one who first found it, and he wrote about that, and also Professor Moshe Rossman. But while they both wrote about the text, this is a very, very large, complex text, which merits to be analyzed very, very carefully. And there's a lot of information in this text. It's a real treasure trove of information about, not just about magic and magical practices, but about the social reality and the cultural reality of Eastern European communities at the time. And so while they tackled important aspects of the manuscript, there's really still so much room for additional work to be done on this particular manuscript. Now, some of the other manuscripts that I brought today into my presentation, they have not been discussed in a systematic way. Some aspects, actually I didn't bring that manuscript, but some aspect of these manuscripts, for example, exorcism in a text from the Bodleian Library, an Oxford manuscript, has been analyzed, and there's the Hebrew book devoted to exorcism from one particular manuscript. But again, there are scores of manuscripts that somehow were relegated to the margins. And again, that's why I find that lived religion is such a helpful category, because so often there's this demarcation that happens in scholarship, that which is magical is superstitious and therefore not serious and should be marginalized. And there was certainly a sense of marginalization of practical Kabbalah, even within Jewish scholarship. So this work that we're doing currently, through this work, we are hopefully being able to redress this issue and bring Kabbalah scholarship and Kabbalah research more in conversation with practical Kabbalah and with magical manuscripts.
Thank you very much. Helen asked, did mainstream Jewish leaders object to these Kabbalistic amulets and ideas?
Yes. So there are two stages and two phases to the popularization of Kabbalah. And the first one comes in the 16th century. We can go earlier, but the first one really comes in the 16th century. And in the 16th century, the question was, can we print Kabbalistic books? And there was a major debate in the Italian Jewish community. And there were rabbis who came down on the side of, yes, it's very important to print Kabbalah. And there were rabbis who said, absolutely not. Rabbi Isserles, for example, who wrote the Mappa, who wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, an Ashkenazi, a Polish rabbi, says that too many people meddle into Kabbalistic matters, and this interest and uninitiated, uninformed study of Kabbalah actually takes Jews away from the important mitzvot, the halachic aspects of Jewish life, and therefore should not be printed. It should be reserved only for the elites, only for Jewish leaders of Jewish communities, learned individuals who have the time, who have the necessary prerequisites, the Talmudic learning to study it. But again, as I mentioned, the other rabbis said, no, the very fact that printing has come, this technological advance, signals that we're living in Messianic times. Therefore, the Messianic times demands that we need to print Kabbalah, because Jews of all ilk of the learned as well as the less learned Jews need to learn this knowledge, because by learning it, we will hasten the coming of the Messiah. And I write about it in a little bit about this topic and this debate in my book. Now, the next stage is the question in the 18th century, can we print? So fine, now the books of theoretical Kabbalah, the Zohar, Ma'arechet HaElochut, Jikatilla's works have already been printed in the 16th century. Now, can we print practical Kabbalah? And the answer to that question, again, Hillel Baal Shem says, absolutely not. You cannot print this kind of knowledge. This requires, again, the same argument, this requires a certain kind of personality, a certain type of preparedness, a certain kind of knowledge, and only the right kind of person can be taught this wisdom. It cannot be brought to the Amcha, to those who are not properly prepared to receive this knowledge. So again, we have this debate of can we print, what should we print? And just like in the 16th century, when they could not stop the printing of the Zohar and other Kabbalistic texts, the same happened in the 18th century, and 4 or 5, one after the other, books on practical Kabbalah appeared and were used in various communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lisa Miriam asked, have you had any experiences with practical Kabbalah that you are willing to share?
Well, thank you very much. It's a wonderful question, but I do not. But I do know, when I was living in Israel not too long ago, two years ago, I was part of a Zohar Havruta, learning with wonderful scholars, and the head of the Havruta was Professor Yehuda Libes. And there were several people in this Havruta who worked in hospitals, in Hadassah and various hospitals in Jerusalem. And they were reporting that, in fact, there were such magical practices in hospitals, and there were individuals who brought amulets to the infirm in the hospitals. So it seems that magic is very much alive in Israel today. I have not come into direct contact with it, but let me tell you a very funny anecdotal story. When we spent the first sabbatical of my husband's in Jerusalem in 2006 and 7, Hanukkah came around and we invited guests. We were sitting down to the meal, we were singing, eating, and all of a sudden the doorbell rang. We looked at each other. Well, we didn't invite guests, we didn't expect anybody to come. Who was at the door? So one of our friends goes to the door, he comes back 10 minutes later, and I said, Leiby, can you tell me who was at the door? How come you didn't tell us who the person was? He says, well, it's very funny, Andrea. The man at the door was actually coming to look for an amulet maker. And I told him that he came to the wrong house because unfortunately here there's nobody who's making amulets. So sadly he went away. But the very fact that he showed up at our door means that there are people who are looking for this type of knowledge, who are looking for this type of cure, and they go and seek out this type of expertise.
Thank you very much. Shayna asked if there's a book that for sale that contains the contents of this presentation. Maybe you could show your book once more, and maybe we could put in a link for where people can purchase it. Is that possible?
Okay, so my presentation today is not in a book yet, but thank you for asking, because it will, God willing, be my next book on women and practical Kabbalah. And we will have to wait probably a little bit for it to come out, but hopefully soon enough. But I will be very happy to perhaps share in a link after the presentation the book that I had written earlier, which is about popularizing Kabbalah in the early modern period, looking more between 1550 and 1650, and some of the ways in which Kabbalah was made more accessible to less learned Jewish audiences and also Christian scholars who were interested in it. I'll be happy to share that.
Thank you very, very much. We have time for one more question. Could you comment on the printing of Practical Kabbalah in Eastern Europe in the 18th century? How did the process affect and challenge the work of Balei Shem?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So as I mentioned, unfortunately, the printing of works and books of practical Kabbalah, in spite of the admonition of various rabbinic individuals, as well as other Balei Shem, like Hillel Baal Shem, could not be arrested in the 18th century. And we see the printing of several volumes devoted to practical Kabbalah. Joel Baal Shem of Zamość, his work Mifalot Elohim is printed in Zholkiev in 1725. A little bit earlier, in 1720, also Zholkiev, Rabbi Elijah of Helm prints Toldot Adam, which is a very important work used by many Hasidic masters and rabbis in East Central Europe. In 1708, and earlier printing in Hamburg, Sefer Zechira by Zechariah Simna of Plungien. And finally, in 1740 in Berlin, we see the printing of Shem Tov Katan by Benjamin Beinisch. In Hillel Baal Shem's work, he repeatedly comes back to this issue and this problem that the printing of Practical Kabbalah challenges his own work and undermines his own expertise and undermines his own ability to sell his knowledge, because there's also an element that this was a profession. So you, for example, for Hillel Baal Shem, as well as many Baalei Shem, as well as the Baal Shem Tov, itinerancy was the way of life. You traveled from one community to another community, whether it was, this is Eastern Europe. It's not, the weather is not balmy like in Florida. And you had to go even in the winter from community to community to community. And he laments the fact, and just like the Baal Shem Tov, he longed for settling down finally somewhere. But in order for you to settle down, you need a community that recognizes you and wants to pay for your salary and wants to contract your services as a local Baal Shem. And there were such individuals, but most of the Baalei Shem did not have an opportunity to settle down. And this presented the Baalei Shem with a very difficult life. And so you put in so many years and so much learning, at the end of which all that secret knowledge that you acquired through so many years of hard learning and a kind of semi-ascetic lifestyle is undermined by the printing of these books. Because, as Hillel says, what do unlearned Jews in these communities say? Well, I don't need you. I don't need your expertise. I can go and buy one of these books and I will be able to do anything and everything. All your knowledge will be my knowledge. And he makes this very explicit in the manuscript. And he further says, how can they expect to do all these things? It took me so many years to acquire it. On top of it, you can't just follow a recipe. There are so many things that are not written down. And even in his own manuscript, there are things that are not written down. It's very similar, when your grandmother passes your recipe and she says, oh yes, but I forgot, I just do this so quickly when I'm doing it. When somebody is used to recipes and used to performing recipes and doing recipes, they don't write everything down because everything is in the doing, in the making. And it was very similar with the Baalei Shem. So the printed books will be missing important ingredients, but at the same time give the illusion to these people that they have all the knowledge that they that at their fingertips that they can use to perform all kinds of magical operations. And Hillel repeatedly says that unfortunately that is not the case. But the very fact that Hillel, it seems, never got a permanent position, and his dreams of finally settling down and receiving some kavod, some respect from the Jewish community in which he lived, was not met with success, but rather with failure, signaled already the end of the Baal Shem period and the kind of transformation of Jewish society from a magical, mystical type of approach to the body and to cure to a more scientific and medically based approach. So that was, to some extent, an end to the workings of the Baalei Shem. But as we see from current examples, there are still, and there are important Baalei Shem in Israel even today.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Andrea Gondos. There are many, many thanks and compliments in the chat. I will absolutely send you the transcript so you can see it. I will open the microphones as soon as I'm done. Thank you, Dr. Gondos, once more.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in our next events. Laila Tov.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
So wonderful to see everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So interesting. Thank you.
Be well, everyone.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Keep going.
Thank you.
Keep
All the
going.
best.
Yes.
Bye.
Oh, nice to see you, Jewel. Bye,
Yeah.
bye, bye.
Bye. All the best.
Bye.
Be well.
Laila
All the
Tov.
best. Kol tuv, kol tuv. Thank you for being with us.
Amazing.
Thank
Amazing.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye. Okay.
Laila Tov from Jerusalem. Bye-bye.
Bye.